The story of Grigori Rasputin is not merely the tale of a scheming peasant who infiltrated the highest corridors of imperial power. It is a terrifying descent into the dark realm of religious fanaticism, hypnotic manipulation, and a man who seemed so profoundly intertwined with the supernatural that even poison, bullets, and icy waters struggled to claim his life. To his devoted followers, he was a holy man, a living saint capable of channeling the divine power of God to perform impossible miracles. To his bitter enemies, he was a chaotic demon in human flesh, a dark wizard who used hypnosis and black magic to enslave the Russian monarchy and drive a centuries-old empire straight into the fires of revolution. But who was the real man behind the dark myth, and how did an unwashed Siberian peasant come to hold the fate of an entire nation in his hands? Tonight, we step into the shadowed halls of the Romanov dynasty. Welcome to Night Chronicles. Are you ready to learn the truth? To understand the terrifying aura surrounding Rasputin, we must travel back to his humble, isolated origins in the vast, frozen wilderness of Siberia. Born in 1869 in the remote village of Pokrovskoye, Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin spent his youth as an illiterate peasant known among locals for his wild temperament, heavy drinking, and an unsettling, hypnotic stare that made people deeply uncomfortable. The turning point of his life occurred in his late 20s, when he suddenly abandoned his wife, children, and farm to embark on a grueling religious pilgrimage. He walked thousands of miles on foot, visiting holy monasteries across Russia and Greece, immersing himself in esoteric Christian mysticism and the secret, controversial doctrines of underground religious sects. During his long wanderings, Rasputin underwent a radical spiritual transformation. He emerged not as a traditional monk, but as a strannik, a holy wanderer who claimed to receive direct visions from the Virgin Mary. He developed a bizarre, dark theological philosophy that shocked traditional clergy. He preached that true salvation could only be achieved through total repentance, and true repentance was impossible unless a person had first committed deep, terrible sins. In Rasputin's mind, sin was not the enemy of holiness, but the necessary doorway to divine grace. Armed with this intoxicating doctrine, an uncanny ability to read human emotions, and eyes that seemed to burn through a person's soul, Rasputin began his journey toward the capital city of St. Petersburg. By the time Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg in 1903, the Russian aristocratic elite was deeply obsessed with the occult, spiritualism, tarot, and mystical gurus. They were desperate for novelty and spiritual fulfillment, and the wild, bearded Siberian peasant with unkempt hair and intense, piercing blue eyes instantly captivated the high society salons. To the bored aristocrats, Rasputin was the authentic voice of the holy Russian countryside, a living mystic who possessed raw, untamed spiritual energy. It was not long before rumors of his strange gifts reached the highest level of Russian society, the Winter Palace, home to Tsar Nicholas II, and his wife, Empress Alexandra. The royal couple lived under a suffocating cloud of despair and secret terror. Their youngest child and long-awaited heir to the throne, Tsarevich Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, an agonizing, incurable genetic blood disorder passed down through European royalty. In an era long before modern medicine, even a minor bruise or a tiny nosebleed could cause massive internal bleeding, causing the young boy excruciating pain and threatening his life at any moment. The royal doctors were completely helpless, watching in despair as the boy slowly bled to death inside his own body. In their absolute desperation, the desperate imperial couple turned away from science and opened their doors to the mysterious Siberian holy man. In 1907, during one of young Alexei's worst medical crises, Rasputin was summoned to the imperial palace. The boy was lying in bed, writhing in agony, his face deathly pale as doctors warned he would likely not survive the night. Rasputin calmly approached the child's bedside, bowed his head, and began to pray softly. He stroked the boy's forehead, whispered gentle words into his ear, and assured the terrified empress that her son would live. Miraculously, within hours, the internal bleeding stopped, the severe swelling subsided, and the boy fell into a peaceful, natural sleep. Modern historians and medical experts still debate how Rasputin achieved this impossible feat. Some suggest he used early forms of clinical hypnosis to drastically lower the boy's heart rate and blood pressure, reducing internal bleeding. Others point out that Rasputin strictly forbade the royal doctors from giving Alexei any more medication, unwittingly saving the boy from aspirin, a newly invented drug that doctors were prescribing, which actually thins the blood and worsens hemophilia. But to Empress Alexandra, it was not science or coincidence, it was an undeniable, divine miracle. She became utterly convinced that Rasputin was a direct messenger sent by God to keep her son alive, and that as long as the peasant stayed near the royal family, the heir to the throne would survive. With the Empress's total, unwavering devotion, Rasputin's influence grew to staggering, dangerous proportions. He gained unrestricted, secret access to the royal apartments, becoming a personal advisor to the Tsar and Tsarevich. But while he acted as a pious, humble, holy man inside the palace, his life outside the royal walls was a chaotic vortex of scandal, debauchery, and moral corruption. He frequented local taverns, drank legendary amounts of alcohol, and engaged in wild, night-long orgies with wealthy noblewomen who believed that sleeping with the holy man would cleanse them of their sins. When reports of Rasputin's wild, degenerate behavior reached Tsar Nicholas II, the Tsar tried multiple times to banish the peasant from the capital. But every time Rasputin was sent away, young Alexei would suffer another sudden, life-threatening bleeding episode. Terrified for her son's life, Empress Alexandra would frantically summon Rasputin back, and once again, the boy's bleeding would miraculously stop. Rasputin himself was acutely aware of his power over the royal family, famously warning the Empress, "Remember that I am necessary to you. If I am not here, your son will die, and if he dies, the dynasty will fall." As World War I erupted in 1914, Russia was plunged into catastrophic bloodshed and political instability. When Tsar Nicholas II made the fatal decision to leave the capital and take personal command of the Russian army at the front lines, he left Empress Alexandra in charge of domestic government affairs. In reality, the country was now being ruled from behind the scenes by Rasputin. The uneducated Siberian peasant was suddenly dictating high-level political decisions, firing competent government ministers, appointing his corrupt friends to key cabinet positions, and influencing military strategies. The Russian public and noble class were outraged. Rumors swirled through the streets that the Empress, who was originally born in Germany, was a traitor working for the enemy, and that Rasputin was her secret lover and a puppet master working for dark forces. The prestige of the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty was rapidly crumbling into dust, and a group of wealthy, patriotic aristocrats came to a desperate conclusion. For the Russian Empire to survive, the Dark Monk had to be eliminated. The conspiracy to assassinate Rasputin was led by Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the wealthiest men in Russia, along with Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a cousin of the Tsar. On the freezing night of December 30th, 1916, Prince Yusupov invited Rasputin to his opulent palace under the pretense of meeting Yusupov's beautiful wife. They led Rasputin down into a soundproofed, elegantly decorated basement room. There, Yusupov served Rasputin expensive cakes and glasses of sweet Madeira wine, both heavily laced with lethal doses of potassium cyanide, enough poison to kill a dozen men instantly. To Yusupov's sheer horror, Rasputin ate the poisoned cakes and drank glass after glass of the poisoned wine with complete indifference. As hours passed, the dark monk showed no signs of discomfort. Instead, he grew cheerful, demanding more wine and asking Yusupov to play the guitar and sing for him. Panic gripped the conspirators waiting upstairs. Around 2:30 in the morning, a terrified Yusupov excused himself, went upstairs to retrieve a heavy revolver from his co-conspirators, and returned to the basement. As Rasputin turned to look at a crucifix hanging on the wall, Yusupov drew his gun and shot him directly in the chest at point-blank range. Rasputin collapsed onto the floor with a heavy thud, blood pooling beneath him, and lay completely still. Believing the dark nightmare was finally over, the conspirators celebrated, preparing to dispose of the body. But when Yusupov leaned down to inspect the corpse, Rasputin's eyes suddenly snapped wide open with violent, insane fury. The wounded monk leaped to his feet, let out a terrifying guttural roar, and grabbed Yusupov by the throat, ripping the epaulets off his uniform. In a desperate struggle for his life, Yusupov broke free and fled up the stairs in absolute terror. Rasputin, bleeding profusely from his chest wound, crawled on his hands and knees up the stairs and burst out into the snow-covered courtyard, screaming that he would tell the Empress everything. Another conspirator, the politician Vladimir Purishkevich ran out into the freezing night and fired 4 shots at the fleeing monk. 2 bullets missed, but one struck Rasputin in the back, and the final bullet pierced his forehead, dropping him into the snow. The conspirators frantically beat his motionless body with a heavy rubber club, wrapped him in a thick canvas sheet, bound his hands and feet with heavy rope, and drove his body to the Petrovsky Bridge. There, they dropped his battered frame through a hole in the frozen ice of the Neva River. When Rasputin's frozen body was recovered from the icy river 2 days later, an autopsy revealed a final, terrifying detail that solidified his supernatural legend forever. Despite the lethal dose of cyanide, the bullet to the chest, the bullet to the head, and the severe beatings, the coroner discovered water in his lungs, proving that Grigori Rasputin was still alive when he was thrown into the river and had ultimately died of drowning while trying to break through his frozen icy grave. Just weeks before his violent death, Rasputin had written a chilling prophetic letter to Tsar Nicholas II, leaving behind a final, terrifying curse. I feel that I shall leave life before January 1st. If I am killed by ordinary assassins, you, the Tsar of Russia, will have nothing to fear for your children. But if I am murdered by nobles, by the aristocracy, then their hands will remain stained with my blood, and for 20 years they will not wash their hands. Brothers will kill brothers. No nobles will remain in the country. Tsar of the land of Russia, if you hear the sound of the bell which will tell you that Grigori has been killed, you must know this. If it was your relations who have wrought my death, then no one of your family will remain alive for more than 2 years. Rasputin's prophecy came true with terrifying mathematical precision. Within 10 weeks of his death, the Russian Revolution erupted, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate the throne and ending centuries of imperial rule. Less than 2 years later, in July 1918, the entire imperial family, Tsar Nicholas, Empress Alexandra, and all 5 of their children, including young Alexei, were led down into a cellar in Yekaterinburg and executed by Bolshevik firing squads. Was Grigori Rasputin merely an unusually lucky, manipulative peasant who exploited a desperate mother's love for her dying child? Or was he truly a dark mystic, a human vessel tapped into dangerous, otherworldly powers that held the fate of an entire empire in his hands? The empire he helped destroy has long since fallen, but the dark, terrifying shadow of the devil monk remains immortal. If you enjoyed this chronicle, make sure to like the video, share it with fellow lovers of dark history, and leave a comment below. Do you think Rasputin possessed real supernatural powers, or was he just a master manipulator? This was Midnight Mysteries. See you in the next video when the lights go out. See.